Good evening, I'm Alex Perche in Washington, and we begin with some breaking news. Sources tell ABC News that a federal grand jury in Virginia has rejected the Department of Justice's attempt to revive a fraud case against New York Attorney General Letitia James. Sources also say that federal prosecutors failed to convince a majority of grand jurors to approve charges that James misled a bank for favorable terms on a home mortgage. ABC News previously reported that prosecutors who investigated James for possible mortgage fraud found evidence that appeared to undercut some of the allegations in her September indictment. So for more on this, I want to bring in our Washington, D.C. Bureau Managing Editor, Catherine Valders, and also ABC News legal contributor and professor at Hofstra Law, James Sample. And Catherine, I want to begin with you. What more do we know about this grand jury rejecting the DOJ's attempt to revive this fraud case?
So remember, it was just days ago that a judge threw out the charges against New York Attorney General Letitia James because the judge found that the U.S. attorney there, Linsey Halligan, Trump's former defense attorney, now U.S. attorney, that the judge found that her appointment to be U.S. attorney was invalid. So the cases were thrown out, both of Tish James and former FBI Director James Comey. Now, we knew from sources that prosecutors would try and indict the case again. We do know that it wasn't Linsey Halligan, the U.S. attorney, who presented the charges again. It was another person who was working on the case to potentially, obviously, make the charges valid if they were to be charged and if the grand jury were to return an indictment. So we know that down in Norfolk, Virginia, a grand jury met today and received a presentment of charges related to bank fraud. So those similar charges that we know were thrown out, and that the grand jury declined to return the indictment. So they voted essentially no on the charges. We don't know what that vote is, but it definitely is a blow to the Justice Department as they continue to attempt to prosecute people who Trump has said or perceived to be his political enemies. So that's at least what we know so far. Now, that does not mean, Alex, that they won't attempt to try and re-indict again. Will they go to a grand jury again? Will they go to another grand jury in the Eastern District of Virginia? This was in Norfolk. There's another one in Alexandria. All these things are still on the table from sources that I'm talking to. But what we know right now is that federal prosecutors tried to get an indictment returned, tried to bring these charges again, and were unsuccessful.
Well, and James, with this federal grand jury saying no, basically returning what they call a no true bill, I was going to ask and follow up. Does that mean that this case is essentially dead? Catherine said that they could go to another system, try this in another area. But in terms of having the grand jury here say no true bill, what does this mean for Tish James?
Alex, you're absolutely right. Catherine's analysis is absolutely right. In fact, they could even go to back to the same grand jury, provided that they didn't present the exact same case. They would need to show that they were presenting additional evidence that they didn't present the first time, or in this case, the second time around. But this is, as Catherine said, a substantial defeat for the Department of Justice. Really an embarrassment when you consider just how easy it is to get an indictment, a federal indictment. The old phrase is you can indict a ham sandwich. Well, this Department of Justice is proving to have a difficult time even clearing that low bar. And to have this come just 10 days after the scenario where Linsey Halligan was deemed unlawfully appointed. This case, the Letitia James case, as opposed to the Jim Comey case, was really expected to be the one where presumably, if they could continue on and get an indictment, get a re-indictment, if you will, Letitia James was the scenario where they had a lower bar to clear because they didn't also have a statute of limitations problem, which they definitely do in the scenario with Jim Comey. So this is a significant setback, and it's a significant setback that needs to be considered, I think, in juxtaposition with some of the other Department of Justice and Trump administration rule of law efforts. The time and resources that are being devoted to these cases, which are at best thin on the merits and, in addition, procedurally flawed, is really coming at the expense of the rule of law when you consider the matters that are not being prosecuted.
Well, and Catherine, to James's point, if you are James Comey and you see this alert pop up on your phone, certainly it's welcome news. But what do you think that means for his case? Obviously, as Professor Sample pointed out, there is a truncated statute of limitations that DOJ is playing with there. So, what do you think that means for him?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Of course, these are out of the same districts. I would imagine that if they tried to re-indict or bring the Comey charges again, that the prosecutors who were previously on that case would be the ones to present before the grand jury. But I'm sure if you're James Comey, you're looking at the James matter and you're feeling potentially good about your chances if DOJ tries again to charge you. However, of course, as we know, the cases are very different. There's different evidence, if you will. But again, I think it obviously looks good for someone like James Comey because both cases have been tossed out. And now, while they're attempting to bring these charges, at least for now, they aren't being successful.
Yeah. Catherine Falders, James Sample, thank you both.